that's already destroying the environmental systems that we depend on.
All right, Patrick Harvey, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Now, many of Jimmy Savile's victims were ignored or laughed at when they revealed at the time that he had sexually abused them, according to a report by the NSPCC and the police. The document, based on interviews with 26 people, also found that many blamed themselves for what had happened to them. Our media correspondent David Sillito has this report.
It's been the question from the beginning, why didn't people speak up sooner about Jimmy Savile? In the weeks after the initial revelations, police received details of 214 offences, 126 indecent acts. And today's report, based on interviews, explains why it took so long. Many said as children they felt powerless to report incidents to the authorities. Some didn't even understand what had happened. One person did mention it to her family. They laughed. Few knew they could even go to the police. And of those that did, nothing happened.
It's been quite scandalous, actually, that historically these victims have found themselves in a situation. But I think what we've had is a significant movement by the police very recently, and particularly following the start of Operation Yew Tree, where they've been far more receptive and understanding to victims of non-recent abuse.
Indeed, several of those reporting Savile said they were shocked that the police had now listened to them. But there was also a unanimous feeling that while attitudes have changed, the police have become detached from the communities they serve. David Sillito, BBC News.
Well, at the same time as this report today, lawyers for some of Savile's victims have been at the High Court calling for a compensation scheme to be approved, which is currently subject to legal delay. Well, let's talk to Liz Dux from the firm Slater & Gordon Solicitors, which represents more than 140 of Jimmy Savile's victims. We'll come to that High Court development in a moment, but let's start with that NSPCC report, because it is still quite staggering when you hear phrases like people who did have the courage to come forward to be ignored or laughed at when they made those allegations. Is that something, in terms of the clients that you have dealt with, that echoes with you in terms of what you've been told?
Definitely, and many of my clients contributed towards the NSPCC report. They were in those focus groups. That's why that report is so compelling, because it was directly from the victims' mouths. And most shocking of all was that they had no idea that the people that they were telling that they'd been abused had no sort of obligation to pass that information on, and they were really shocked by that. And it's why that they are calling for a change in the law to make it mandatory for people in regulated authority to pass those sorts of reports on. All the victims are saying that they want some reform to come out of this dreadful episode, and that's the real reform that they want done.
Many of them spoke about how they thought they wouldn't be believed if they spoke out, and I suppose in part underlining this, and it is the case with paedophiles across the board, that so many times they deliberately target vulnerable people, because for that very reason that it's difficult for them sometimes to speak out. Yes,
I mean, many of Savile's victims were very vulnerable, and they would say to themselves, you know, did I bring it on myself? And even clients recently have rung up saying, well, I think I consented, but they were young children. They couldn't possibly have consented. And this is the sort of change in attitude that we need to affect now. They felt they couldn't even tell their parents. They felt tremendous shame, and that they had in some way brought it upon themselves.
And even now, some of them making the point that they still haven't told their families, despite coming forward to the authorities.
Yes, I mean, a lot of my clients, I have to contact them in secret. They haven't felt able to tell their families. They still feel a great sense of shame about what's happened to them, and that's wholly wrong that victims should feel like this. And we as a society have to do something so that they know that it wasn't their fault.
Do you think attitudes have changed amongst, most principally, I suppose, police and prosecutors? I mean, the DPP has been speaking in the last few days about their current position, but do you think attitudes have fundamentally changed from when these people were trying to come forward and make their voices heard?
I think they've changed to the better, but there are still some fundamental problems. So, for example, in the report, the victims speak about how sensitively they were dealt with by the Yew Tree officers, but that it is still so difficult for victims to report to the police. I mean, I'm dealing with victims of abuse now, and they're being told, oh, go to your local police station. That's terribly difficult for someone to walk into the local police station